And good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hope you had an absolutely fantastic weekend. Uh, my wife and I, in our house, we've got this patio, and we like to eat our breakfast out there. Our dog really likes that too, by the way. But anyway, I mean, to tell you what, over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 days, the weather has just been astoundingly beautiful. There's not been any wind. You sit out there and it's 74, 75 degrees maybe. And it's just such a wonderful time of relaxation, such a wonderful time of, just talking about the day and talking about things in general. But the point of fact is, it's just the weather has just been so unbelievably wonderful to do that. My wife particularly wanted a patio. I'm one of these guys, you know, buildings don't mean that much to me. But nonetheless, when we were buying the house and when we were looking it over, she just, oh, patio, yep, we like that. And I said, okay, whatever, that's fine. So anyway, it's been really, really wonderful over the last few days, weather-wise, to enjoy our patio together, always together. All right. Well, this is going to be our concluding discussion of Yom Kippur, otherwise known as the Day of Atonement. I just simply want to summarize, to some extent, I can't go into great detail, but I want to summarize to a certain extent what I've tried to convey, what I've tried to share in this series of lessons. We're at 82 videos, or 83 now, and of course we covered Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, and we covered a good bit of territory in our discussion of Yom Kippur. The Jews, point number one, the Jews considered Yom Kippur to be the most important of all of Israel's feast days. All of them were important, but this was particularly important because on this day, while God remembered Israel's sins, nonetheless, because of the scapegoat and because of the sacrifice, when God remembered their sins, he did not, shall we say, hold them against them because of the scapegoat, because of the substitutionary nature of that scapegoat and the actual sacrifice. There were two goats on Yom Kippur. One of them was called Azazel. The other one was called For the Lord. Azazel was the scapegoat that was taken off after the high priest laid his hands on the head of that goat, as it were, metaphorically, figurative, spiritually, symbolically, transferring Israel's sins to the head of this goat, and then an appointed person carried that goat, led that goat off into the wilderness, and it was let go. Now, a lot of ancient sources, even in the Talmud, say, well, the goat was then thrown off of a cliff. That's not in the biblical text that I'm aware of. If it's there, I haven't found it. But the point of it was this symbolic nature of putting the hands of the high priest on the scapegoat signified that this is a substitutionary sacrifice, just like the goat for the Lord. The substitutionary nature of the death of the goat on Yom Kippur is absolutely critical. And here's why. So many times we hear people say, and this was particularly true back in the 90s, even in the 80s. A lot of scholars came up with the idea of a substitutionary sacrifice, that Jesus dying in our place, that's just abhorrent. Him shedding his blood, what a gruesome, awesome picture. Well, those were the seeds of the woke nonsense even back then. not understanding the righteousness, the holiness, the justice of God. Even as Habakkuk said in Habakkuk chapter 1, 12 to 14, O Lord, you are too holy that your eyes should look upon sin. You are too righteous that your ears should behold or should consider unholiness. How is it then that you're going to use a nation worse than us to judge us? The point of fact here is God's righteousness. Habakkuk understood God's righteousness, God's holiness, God's justice was such that he could not allow sin to dwell in his presence. So God's justice and God's love combined with God's righteousness to offer a substitutionary sacrifice. Otherwise, all men would have to die for their own sin, which raises some really thorny issues, doesn't it? Because you see, we're told that the wages of sin is physical death. And yet we're told Christ died for us. Substitutionary death. Well, if Christ died for us as the Yom Kippur substitutionary sacrifice, then how is it and why is it that even the most faithful child of God today still has to die physically? Substitution means in the place of, ladies and gentlemen. It means instead of. So when people talk on the one hand, and they say, oh yeah, Christ died a substitutionary death. And then they say, well, the death of Adam was physical death, and we all die because we sin. Then what happens to the substitutionary death of Christ? You know, I wrote a book on this entitled The Death of Adam, the Life of Christ. In that book, and really in one way it can be considered a book about the atonement. It can be considered a book about Yom Kippur. Now, I don't discuss Yom Kippur specifically in the book a great deal, but I do discuss the substitutionary death of Christ, which is atonement pure and simple. I discuss it at length. And the radical self-contradiction in the traditional views of the church. You know, William Lane Craig wrote a book, great book, on the substitutionary death of Christ. And in that book, which I cite over and over and over in my book, The Death of Adam, the Life of Christ, William Lane Craig argues that Jesus died in our place so that we wouldn't have to die. Now here's this brilliant philosopher, brilliant logician, wonderful debater, and he seems not to realize that if you argue that the death of Adam was physical death and we all die physically because of our own sin, then either Jesus' substitutionary death was totally ineffective, or he did not die a substitutionary death. Which is it, folks? So I spent a good bit of time on Yom Kippur, the substitutionary death of Christ, because this to me is absolutely fundamentally important. Let me reiterate. If Jesus died to make the atonement, and he offered himself a substitutionary death. And look, you can't have Jesus as the atonement fulfilling the typology of Yom Kippur and then deny that his death was substitutionary. Furthermore, I mean, there are other passages that prove his death was substitutionary. After all, Christ is our Passover, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 5 and following. Well, guess what? The Passover was substitutionary. You killed the lamb in the place of the firstborn child. Substitution. So, commonly, in the festal calendar, which is really what we're talking about here, Commonly in the festal calendar, you have the idea of the substitutionary death. Passover, Yom Kippur. It's simply impossible to deny the substitutionary nature of the death of Christ. That's one reason why I spent a good bit of time on it. And then we discussed in great detail how the question is often posed, was the atonement consummated at the cross? You know, just this morning, I'm filming on Sunday morning. Just this morning, I was reading a response, so-called response to one of my videos. And this individual said, everything was completely finished, including, he said, the 70 weeks. At the cross. He said the end of the age came at the cross. Well, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of misguided claims will not stand up to close examination. You can't argue that the atonement was completed at the cross without arguing that the second coming of Christ was at the cross. Now, I know that a lot of people have disagreed with this, but disagreement is not refutation. Okay? The point of fact is, Hebrews 9 delineates the typological actions of the high priest on the Day of Atonement. He offered the sacrifice. He went into the most holy place. He had to come out. Why was he coming out? For salvation. What did the atonement purchase? Salvation. And thus to argue, oh, well, as one individual did, well, yeah, the atonement was finished at the moment of the cross, at the moment of the death of Jesus on the cross. I asked this individual, and I pointed out to this individual, well, if the atonement was completed at the cross, at the moment of Jesus' death, then Jesus didn't have to go into the most holy place, heaven itself, there to prepare it for us. So without any indication that he had seen the error of his ways, he just simply later wrote, well, yes, Jesus had to go into the most holy place to complete the atonement. When I pointed out this was a radical change, and now all he had to do was to acknowledge that Hebrews 9:28 is talking about Christ coming out of the most holy place to apply the salvation that had been purchased through the death of the sacrifice. And that's what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. You could not have salvation without the high priest coming out of the most holy place. Leviticus 9:22 and 23 establishes this beyond any shadow of a doubt. No blessings, no applications of the blessings of the sacrifices until the high priest came out of the tabernacle/temple. And you know, to digress a little bit, I've mentioned many times I have this friend in Israel who is a Hebrew scholar. Two of his sons are leading rabbis in Israel. He told me in an email, since AD 70 and the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the priesthood, we have had, he's speaking of the Jews, we have had no atonement. Do you grasp how sad that is? Do you catch the power of the hopelessness and the helplessness of that kind of a statement? Because of the rejection and often the outright hatred of Jesus, the Jews are rejecting the only means of atonement available to anyone today. I hope that I have impressed that point on everyone who has been watching these videos. So, in summary, I presented an awful lot of material focusing on some very, very key, crucial, and foundational elements and tenets and aspects of Yom Kippur. I hope that this particular study has been beneficial to you to appreciate, to begin to comprehend the beauty and the glory and the power of Jesus, the atoning sacrifice. Okay, now, beginning tomorrow, we are going to begin an examination of Sukkot, the resurrection feast of Israel. And do not forget, here we are in September 2024, 2-book special. My book, Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, regularly $25.95 plus $7.95 shipping. And my book, Can God Tell Time, regularly $2.95 plus $4.95 shipping, okay? You're going to get these 2 books delivered to your door, no extra postage, nothing extra, $20. I didn't do my math very well. I'm actually hurting myself on this offer. I will not repeat the offer at the same price. I may repeat the offer, the 2 books, or may change this one and put in another one, but it will not be this cheap. I didn't do my math real well. So anyway, for the rest of September 2024, U.S. orders only. Get these 2 books. $20 for this book thrown in absolutely free. Go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Beautiful banner right up at the very top. Just click on it. $20, folks, for a wealth of information. Look, I've already had tons of people tell me that this is a game changer. This changed their life. I think it can change yours. Get a copy of it. You'll be glad you did. In the meantime, I'll see you on the flip side.